8K has been one of the top selling features on action cameras. Today, it's right up there with open gate. Insta360 has been doing it with the Ace Pro for quite a few years. DJI added a firmware update shortly after the release of the Action 6 to get 8K, and GoPro's been, to put it nicely, very lousy with their last few releases. Now this Mission 1 Pro has 8K, and we're gonna put it against the other two and see which one's the best, because these giant camera companies don't tell you that when you get 8K, it comes at a cost. Dedicated low light modes are gone. You lose open gate on all but one of these cameras. Horizon lock gets stripped back. You lose stabilization features. One of them won't even use 8K in hyperlapse or time-lapse modes. And only one of these cameras can shoot in 8K at 60 frames per second. But even then, you're losing field of view options. But doubling that resolution to 8K is only useful if the cameras can keep up to it. And I'm telling you that not all three of these cameras can. And there is definitely a one winner takes mostly all. But we're gonna get right into that now.
This is what 8K looks like on the GoPro Mission 1 Pro. As I start pulling this shot back, you can see the entire opening shot was at 200%. And this is the exact kind of flexibility that's one of the biggest reasons 8K has become the latest trend in action cameras.
And today we're going to figure out which one of these cameras makes the best use of 8K footage and which one of these cameras turns it into a whole pile of missed opportunities. I'm the Jaunting Ape. Welcome back to my channel. First things first, this video is not sponsored. I bought and paid for all of these cameras with my own money. Now, if you're new to my channel, I love to test gear and get to the bottom of it, get the truth, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. Now, the fog is just lifted here. It was very foggy this morning. Last night, I put all three of these cameras out on a time lapse, and the only one that's still running this morning is the Action 6. The other two are dead. Now the fog, it's very foggy this morning, and I'm sure I got a really good video of it lifting with the Action 6 because it was able to go through the whole night. But guaranteed, when I pull the footage here from last night, that the Action 6 will have shat its pants because it's got a major issue with that.
And if you're curious as to why the Action 6 fills its pants every time it tries to do a sunset hyperlapse, I've made an entire video dedicated just to it, hoping to get DJI's attention, maybe change their tune. But this video is about 8K, and with that we're stepping into low light, starting off with ISO. There are three main things that affect how a camera performs in low light, and the first is ISO. ISO is basically electronic gain. Every time we double the number, we gain roughly one stop of brightness. But nothing in this world is free, so the brighter the image gets, the more noise and grain we introduce. Up to ISO 800, I think the Mission 1 Pro handles the image best. But once we reach ISO 1600, things start shifting and the other two cameras begin controlling the noise better. All three cameras are set to their lowest sharpening and noise reduction settings throughout this entire video. As we continue climbing through the ISO range, the Action 6 handles the noise the best. Both the GoPro and the Ace Pro 2 max out at ISO 6400, where the Action 6 goes to ISO 12800, and somehow it still looks noticeably cleaner. All three cameras have a dedicated low light mode, which is limited to 4K. They all perform best at 30 frames per second, but all three also give us the option to run at 60 frames per second, allowing us to slow things down in post for a smoother look. Most of the time, when I'm not using a dedicated low light mode, I leave the ISO in auto, which is exactly what I'm doing here for my jaunt in the woods.
And here's the 8K 30 across all the cameras. The Action 6 has got its variable aperture set to 2.0. And when you look at the lights on the lake, the sunset, it looks like the Action 6 and Hero 13 Mission 1 Pro are looking the best on the screens. But we'll see what it looks like in post. And a little bit of a walk through the woods here with the 8K 30 frames per second, and I'm using a headlamp just to see what you would kind of footage you would get if you were using a headlamp in these woods. I wasn't kidding about there being 3 different ways that these cameras can help with low light. And before we move on to the next spot, I want to talk about that quickly. The first one is aperture, and that's basically how wide the lens can open up to let light in. And for this, it's kind of the opposite of ISO. The lower the number, the better for low light. So the boss here is the Action 6 because it's got a variable aperture, meaning it can shift. So it can go down to 2 and up to 4, whereas the Ace Pro 2 has a 2.6 fixed aperture, meaning it doesn't change. And then just slightly smaller than that is the 2.8 aperture on the Mission 1 Pro. But the third part of this equation is sensor sizing that helps with low light. And in that area, the Mission 1 Pro wins as it's got a 1-inch sensor, which is basically what you'd find on like the DJI Pocket Series, Pocket 3, Pocket 4, Mini 5 Pro. The Action 6 has the second biggest sensor, and this one is a square sensor. It's a 1/1.1 inch square, and I believe it's the same sensor they use in the Osmo 360. It's just that there's 2 of them in that one. And the sensor on the Ace Pro 2 is 1/1.3 inches, so it is the smallest out of the 3. Now that we know the sensor sizes, let's talk a little bit about open gate and how they do and don't work here in 8K. So, you know, it's going to be easier for me to explain this if I turn these things on, and I'll film through there. Okay, so open gate. Which one of these cameras has open gate in 8K? And I'll add that I've got all 3 of them. The mics are set to no noise canceling, no wind reduction, none of that. And I'll switch between them here as I'm talking. And pay attention to the sky behind me, because we're gonna test the dynamic range a little bit here, see which ones are blowing the sky out and which ones are not. So starting with the Action 6, it's got a 16:9 aspect ratio, which is not open gate. It's not using that full sensor. It can only shoot in 30 frames per second in 8K. Now the Mission 1 Pro is the only one out of these 3 that uses open gate with 8K, and it can only do this in 30 frames per second. So what that does is it allows us to crop in on the whole sensor, that 4x3, to get either the vertical or the wide, depending whether you want to post to social media like TikTok or Instagram, or if you want to post to something wide like this YouTube video. Now, what's interesting is with the Ace Pro 2, there's a couple of different aspect ratios you can use. Neither of them are open gate. So you get that classic 16:9, same as the Ace Pro 2, but it does have another trick up its sleeve, and I'm going to switch to that right now. Okay, so here's what the Insta360 can do. It's got this 2.35/1. It's like a wide cinematic. It's pretty cool, I guess, but it's not open gate. It's actually probably the opposite of open gate. Maybe Cinegate, you could call it. But yeah, those are the aspect ratios. Now that brings us to one of my favorite parts of this video, and that's learning from Matt's mistakes. So I made a great mistake yesterday when I was trying to do a overheating test on these 3 cameras. What I did was I set up in the woods in the shadows and I ran them. It was about 26 degrees and I thought they would overheat. But the first mistake that I made was that my Action 6 here, I just got it back from DJI from the care and refresh because the front screen had cracked. It fell over on a rock while it was doing a time lapse and didn't even drop and the screen cracked. So anyways, I sent it in, it came back, and I didn't bother putting a memory card in it. So on my first test, what happened was I came out to check on them and the Action 6, to my surprise, was done. And when I turned it on, it had just ran out of storage. So I had to go back, charge them all up again, and run the test again. But the second time I set them up, I ran them through the heat and trying to get them to overheat. And I guess my mistake there was leaving them in the shadows because not one of them overheated. The Action 6 died from battery. It lasted the longest. I think it was around 87 minutes. The GoPro was, I think, 81 minutes. And the Ace Pro 2 was by far the least battery amount there. It burned down in just shy of 60 minutes. So today it's a little bit hotter out. I don't know, this thing is saying 30, 31, 32 degrees. I'm gonna leave these things out in the sun and I'm going to try this again because they gotta overheat, right? Super awesome that none of them did overheat in that test, because I'm not going to be doing anything crazier than that. That's, you know, 27 degrees, 26, 27 degrees. Now, another thing that I learned from my mistake is when I was going through the files from that 80 minutes of recording between these things, and that was with the bit rates. There's some very interesting stuff that's going on there, and I'm going to get into that when we get to the file sizes. But for now, let's jump into the time lapses, because there's some major differences with these guys when it comes to time lapses and hyperlapses.
So this is a tornado season here in Saskatchewan, and what better opportunity to test the time-lapse modes on these guys. My phone kept going off for reports of tornado touchdowns in the area, and while I never found one, the fast-moving storm clouds were perfect for testing these hyperlapses out. Starting out with the Action 6, it gives us lots of flexibility here, anywhere from auto to 2 times all the way up to 30 times speeds, but it tops out at only 4K, and it only works in a 16:9 aspect ratio. So this guy doesn't even have 8K at all in the time-lapse tests. For hyperlapse, Insta360 gives us time shift, but with no control over the speed, I never use it. So to match the other two at 30 times speed, I'm using a stabilized time-lapse with a 1-second interval. That gives us 4K and 4:3. You can shoot this in 8K, but the minimum interval jumps to 2 seconds. The Mission 1 Pro calls its hyperlapse a motion lapse, and it gives us the same selectable speeds as the Action 6. It works in both 16:9 and 4:3, so it has the open gate, and it is the only one that can do a proper stabilized hyperlapse in 8K. So the Action 6 is limited to 4K in time-lapse mode, and here's how that compares with the GoPro's 8K. Once we punch into 200%, the difference becomes a little clearer, but jumping to 8K can compromise some dynamic range, and here you can see the Action 6 holding onto that blue sky a little better. And here we have a different orientation to show just how massive this storm really was. On the top is the Mission 1 Pro in 8K, in the middle the Ace Pro 2 in 8K, and on the bottom the Action 6 is doing its best in 4K. The difference is already pretty clear here, but that gap spreads even more as the clouds roll in and we start losing light. You'll notice the GoPro blowing up the skies on the left side, and that is the trade-off for holding onto the shadows better than the other two cameras. I could fix that by dropping the exposure compensation to -0.5 or -1, but I've kept every camera here at EV 0.0 throughout these tests to keep things consistent. I've got a ton of good footage out of these storms, but I was pretty happy when they finally cleared, because I needed that sun for some proper dynamic range testing. And I love that sun star on the Action 6. This is one of the best parts of having an adjustable aperture. And here is a great example of just how well the GoPro can handle the shadows in these tamarack needles. It's also the only one of these three that offers 8K at 60 frames per second, which gives the option to slow the footage down smoothly in post, and that is one of the biggest advantages that it holds over the other two. All three of these cameras show good detail in these towering spruce, but when I shift back toward the sky, the Ace Pro 2 takes its sweet time figuring out just what to do with it. It eventually finds the blue, and it has no trouble pulling the shadows back up when we go back to the spruce. But this slow exposure adjustment has always bothered me with the Ace Pro 2, and I'm still not quite sure what the deal is there.
Now these pine needles have some pretty fine details, and well, that's what 8K is all about. So next we're gonna check out just how sharp that these cameras are in their 8K and run through some of the zoom modes. So
there are a couple of things that I have to mention here, and the first is that with the Action 6, oh hey Mr. Dragonfly, there's two of them. The first one is with the Action 6, it's a bit underexposed, just like we saw earlier with the thunderstorm. The shadows in the logs and the grass, they're hurting just a little bit compared to the other two. Now the more important and more prominent problem is with the Ace Pro 2, it's looking quite soft compared to the other two. Now they're all in 8K. This is actually the second time that I shot this. I had shot one the day before, and when I was editing it, I couldn't believe how soft it looked. I thought I had made a mistake. Here you can see we got the same issue with the softness on the Ace Pro 2. And for this one, I had shot 4 or 5 different clips with the cameras the same, and they're all the same. I went through all of them. So we're gonna bounce back to the first one, and we're gonna go through the zoom levels. Make note of where the logs are on the bottom. You can see the field of view is a little bit different. Now I've got the Mission 1 Pro and the Ace Pro 2 in their linear fields of view, and the Action 6 is in its standard D-warp. And the Action 6 and the GoPro look closer to each other than the Ace Pro 2. This is what it looks like when the cameras are all on their 2 times zoom. Something neat about this is that on the Ace Pro 2, you can toggle the zoom on and off while you're recording like this, whereas with the other two you have to stop at the recording and then turn them off and on. I've actually messed up the footage a lot on the Ace Pro 2 because I accidentally bump that little 2x zoom on the screen, and with the Action 6 you have to double tap it to engage it, and on the Hero you have to tap into the different part of the menu. So safety, I prefer the safety over the blotched footage I've had, because I've had a lot of it with the Ace Pro 2. So earlier in the video I mentioned that there were some stabilization compromises on these cameras in 8K. Now GoPro was the only one who figured out how to do this, which is the horizon steady or horizon lock. So it's the only one out of the three that you can toggle that on well in 8K. Now when it comes to field of view and all that, there's some other compromises that these cameras make, and it is a beautiful evening here at the pond. So I'm gonna run through that and you'll get an idea of what the speakers sound like on the back of these cameras. So for this field of view test, I've got all three cameras set at their minimum stabilization setting, so they're cropped as little as they can while still having some stabilization. Now this is linear on the GoPro, and there are two other fields of view that it offers. This is what the wide angle of view looks like for the Mission 1, and we get super view. So this is as wide as it gets with the 8K on the Mission 1 Pro. So now we're on the Ace Pro 2 in its linear mode, and it offers 4 where the GoPro only offered 3. But in none of the 4 can you use that horizon steady. This is linear. This is what we get with a D-Warp, which is kind of just a straightened out wide form for the Ace Pro 2. And here is a look at the Ultra view, which is plenty wide. And the last field of view we have in 8K here on the Ace Pro 2 is Mega View. And at the end I'm going to compare the 3 widest on all of these cameras. But if we bump it down to 4K, we can go one step further. So here's a look at Action, which is only available in 4K on the Ace Pro 2. So this is the one that you lose when you go into that 8K mode. And this is what we get on standard D-Warp, which is basically the same as the linear on the other 2 cameras. And this is on the DJI Action 6. And this is a look at the natural wide, which again is kind of a corrected version of the wide lens that we're going to see next. And finally, we have the widest field of view that we've got on the Action 6, which is the wide. Now, if we dumb it down to 4K, we unlock the ultra wide view. So here's a look at the ultra wide view on the Action 6 in 4K versus the Action view here on the Ace Pro 2 versus the super view here in 8K on the Mission 1, because you can use that super view in either 4K or 8K, but that's as wide as she gets. So that's gonna bring us to the file size on these guys, because when we double that resolution, we are increasing the file size. Now, I might get these numbers wrong because there's a lot to remember. I'll post up here. I ran a 60-second video against the lake there on all 3 of these cameras, and by far the biggest file was on the Action 6. Now, that file was 1012 megabytes, where the Ace Pro 2 gave me a 948 megabyte file, I believe, and the Mission 1 Pro was the smallest at 918. When we look at the footage, I think that the Action 6 does look the sharpest, but when we get into the advertised bit rates on these cameras, the DJI is advertised at 120 megabits, dog bit, 120 megabits per second. And what it gave me was 130 when I calculated it through that 60-second video and what my final gigabyte count was.
So it was actually more than what it's advertised. Now, when we get to the Ace Pro 2, the Ace Pro 2 is advertised at, I believe, 180 megabits per second, and it gave me 130 in my calculations. And the GoPro, so this is interesting, 240 megabits is what it advertises, but what it gave me was less than 100. I think it was 99.6. So bitrate isn't just a constant. It depends on the frame rate and the movement of the cameras and how much detail is in the images. So against that lake, there was not a whole lot of detail, but great deal of difference in the bitrate and the file sizes between these guys. So one of the questions that I get asked a lot when I make videos like this is for some sort of a cheat sheet or something on paper that will show the differences, or in some cases show the settings that I use and all this. So I have made a PDF for this video, and I will be uploading it to my website, which is not quite finished yet. I'm about 95% finished it, but this question comes up on just about all my videos, and I will be uploading all the back videos. I'll be backlogging these things. I've got the PDFs made. I just got to launch the site. So keep an eye on the pinned comment. If you see a comment there with my website, you'll find the PDF comparison for these cameras. So we all have our different thoughts and needs for what we need to get out of these cameras. For me, after doing all this testing and pixel peaking, and I have to say that the GoPro Mission 1 ticks most of the boxes for me. The biggest things are the open gate recording in 8K. The 60 frame per second is a must because I love to slow down footage when I'm in 8K. And one of the biggest things is that low light time lapse. I love taking time lapses throughout the night, sunset, sunrises, and the other two just can't keep up, especially you, Mr. Action 6. That is garbage. Now, what I did find with my pixel peeping was that the Action 6 probably has the sharpest 8K out of the three of them. When you get zooming in and all that, the image is the most crisp. Now, I got to give something to the Insta360, and that's going to be sound, because I was the most impressed with the sound coming out of the Insta360 Ace Pro 2. Everything else is kind of behind. Now, it is time for them to do an update, and you know, I don't even know why I have one, because between DJI and GoPro, I'm having trouble keeping up, and I'm probably going to put it for sale. So check Facebook Marketplace. I'm the Jaunting Ape. Keep on jaunting. I hope you enjoyed this one, and the world is yours, my friends.